All right. Well, Candace, I am going to shift the program to you. Candace had the connections and the expertise to get with Sonia and Don, and we're just so excited about the presentation today. And Candace has offered, and I'm delighted that she is going to do the formal introduction for us. So Candace, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. I wanted to reflect a little bit on where we've been this month. You know, the theme has been peacekeeping and conflict resolution or conflict prevention. And we started out the month with Kevon Baton, who was a returned Peace Corps volunteer and Rotaract president of the club in Asheville, and currently working for the Chamber of Commerce in Asheville, Buncombe County. And what we learned from him was economic development in itself can be an amazing avenue of service. And we moved on to Franca and Alberto, who were telling us about the amazing work that Mary and Martha is doing to help Ukrainian refugees and their families who are in such desperate need. And then moved on to Julie, who has been inspiring us with her various perspectives on how we can be of service even as a remote club. But the common thread of a lot of that is relationships, building relationships as we look at peace building and dealing with conflict. And it's never more relevant than right now, it seems. But before I introduce Sonia, I do want to extend Don Drock's apologies. Sonia Patterson, I got to know through Don, and I'm extremely grateful that we have this connection with her now. She actually is the daughter of a Rotarian, and she served in the Peace Corps in Honduras in the mid-90s, and she became very fluent in Spanish and worked that into a career in international development, where she went on to become the CEO of 2 global NGOs. But she started her own journey with Rotary in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and has been a member now of the Vienna, Virginia Club since 2012. She serves on the Rotary Foundation of the Vienna board and is now the club foundation chair. But I think most relevant to what we're talking about today, she's a member of the Partnering for Peace, which is a group consisting of Rotarians who were also returned Peace Corps volunteers, and is now the coordinator of the steering team for the Peace Corps community for refugees. And so I don't think anybody is more qualified than Sonia to help us explore the incredible relationship between Peace Corps and Rotary, and how much our missions align with each other. So that's all I'm going to say, and I'm going to turn it over to Sonia. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, thank you so much, Candace, for that lovely introduction. And thank you everyone for such a warm welcome. It is just so great to see new friends on Zoom. Our Rotary family constantly astounds me with the depth and the breadth of the various people that are involved. And yeah, like you said, we've got Italy represented, Florida, Virginia. You know, it's just so fun to get on these Zooms and have a chance to share. I will say our club has done casino night. So I will tell you guys, if you haven't done it, it is a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. And before we get started, I just want to kind of set the stage. I do have some PowerPoint slides to go over just to kind of give us an overview. That's it. I promise no death by PowerPoint. I am not a fan of that. So we'll only do a few slides, but then we'll come back in and we'll have a discussion. Because what I would hope that all of you get out of this time together is an opportunity to really understand, because when we think of Rotary, in our minds, we know that it's a global organization, and we know that we have the sectors, and we know a lot about a bunch of things, right? But this is really going deep into the relationship that Rotary has with the Peace Corps. And maybe some things are new, and maybe some things aren't new, but at the end of the day, my hope is that you're going to be astounded by the synergies that we have and really inspired to find ways to work with the Peace Corps community and the return Peace Corps community in your own club and in your own part of the world. So without further ado, do I have the permission to share my screen?
Sure.
I do. Okay, great. Okay. All right. Does everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm going to put it on presentation mode here. Okay, is everyone seeing a full screen? Okay. Okay, I'm going to assume everyone can hear me. I can't see anyone else, so I'm going to assume if you can't hear me, definitely unmute and speak up, and we'll just take it from there.
Actually, Sonia, if I could interrupt for a second, what we're seeing is actually your desktop, not the full slide, just so you know that.
Okay.
It may be under slideshow on the tab at the top.
Or down
I'm
in
seeing the
the,
PowerPoint, not the desktop.
Oh, well, yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you, Julie.
Mhm.
Okay.
And
How
then
does that work?
and then from the beginning over on the left,
Okay.
and then
Yeah.
we should be able to see the full slide.
Okay.
Is that correct, Julie?
How's that? Is that showing up now?
Sonia, the other quick option is down in the bottom right-hand part of your screen, where you have the option of the little bar that could make it bigger or smaller. Just to the left, there you go. If you click on that, that
Mhm.
should take you to your full screen where your cursor is. That little thing that looks, there you go.
Right, right. Yep, that was what I tried at first, so I'm surprised that didn't work the first time. But how about that? Is that up now?
No.
No, that is so strange. All right, here's what we're going to do because we don't want to waste a bunch of time with this. I'm just going to go and expand the slide size so you can, whoops, that's a little bit too big. How's that? Is that a little bit better for folks to see what's on each slide?
I think we'll be mighty fine.
Okay, all right. Well, let's go ahead and move through it. And thankfully we don't have that many slides anyway, so we'll just fun with PowerPoint here. What can we say? PowerPoint and Zoom. All right. Well, this slide is really just about the Peace Corps and Rotary. It's the opportunity that Rotary recognized, I think, when it decided that peace building was going to be one of its areas of focus, that the Peace Corps could be a strategic partner. And the Partnering for Peace is actually Rotary International working with Peace Corps internationally, in other words, not domestically. And I think that's an important distinction, because the idea is that district grants and other grants and disaster grants in the Ukraine, I heard you talking about Martha and Mary in Ukraine. There are a lot of disaster grants that are coordinated and supported by the Rotarians, as well as Peace Corps affiliates, volunteers, staff members in various countries. Unfortunately, with COVID, the Peace Corps had to call everybody back to the US. And so a lot of things went virtual at that point. But now countries are opening back up again, which gives Rotary a chance, local Rotary clubs in the low and middle income countries, to partner with Rotary International in the projects that Peace Corps volunteers are doing in their villages. So let's move to this slide here, because this really talks about the synergies of, the areas of focus. And we've got, education, health, youth and development, agriculture, economic development, and environment. But I just wanted to show you sort of on the left, you've got the Rotary areas of focus, and then on the right, you've got the Peace Corps areas of focus. And this slide I thought was really important for understanding really what the synergy looks like. For me, I thought my takeaway from this is that education is such a high, 42% of Peace Corps is education. And that's very interesting because of the basic education and literacy that we see with Rotary. And then from there, health. I was a health volunteer in Honduras. Maternal and child health and disease prevention and treatment. Those are all things that the Peace Corps volunteers can certainly get behind and are working on. In my case, I was a midwife in the Peace Corps. It's a career that I did not continue after I got out of the Peace Corps. Okay, let's move down to the next slide, because this is just an example. You might have to kind of focus in on that. I'm not sure how big those numbers and words are on your screen, but it just shows you the depth and the breadth of the various grants and the grant sizes between the Peace Corps and Rotary. So you'll see Latin America represented, you'll see West Africa represented. I think the number is much higher than 1 million right now. There's libraries, there's book drives, there's water and sanitation programs, so many different things that Peace Corps is doing and training volunteers with. And one of the big things about Peace Corps is this idea of partnership and mentorship. And I know that that's something that Rotary also stresses. When a club in the US partners with a club in a lower middle income country, it really needs to be a partnership. It's not this sort of white saviorism going off and saying, well, we know how to do this, and helping other countries figure it out. No, it's a partnership with local expertise really stepping up to the plate. And I think that's what you see on this slide. Now, one of the things that's related to peace building and Rotary is this idea of sort of forced migration and population control. And if we think about the forcibly displaced people around the world, I think the numbers might be astounding to you. I mean, you hear about it all the time, but you might not realize, we're talking about 103 million forcibly displaced people. These are people that were forced out. 72% of those are coming from 5 countries, which I thought was also very interesting. And then look at the percentage of children. 41% are children. So, this is a challenge when we think about really asking ourselves, what impact can Rotary have? And what impact can we have in peace building when this is sort of the macro environment that we're talking about? Only 162,300 refugees returned to their country of origin in 2022. So there are very few people, in other words, going back or being resettled. And maybe we can get into that for the reasons a little bit more when we get into the Q&A. All right, the next slide is going to be our Peace Corps community for refugees. So this is a group, as Candace mentioned, where we are a community of returned Peace Corps volunteers and like-minded individuals somehow associated with Peace Corps, nationally working on issues related to refugees, immigrants, and asylum seekers. So we partner with refugee resettlement agencies. We have focused on a national advocacy campaign where we will get out the word to states or individuals in certain parts of the country where legislation or issues involving immigrants or asylum seekers is really upfront and personal. And what we do is we empower others to be the hands and the feet. So in other words, we're connecting the dots. We are the ones who will connect a returned Peace Corps volunteer with a resettlement agency and help that person really have an impact in their communities. So we're not necessarily the ones we're doing the work in the sense that we're, helping coordinate and organize and what have you, but we have this national network of folks that are connected through the Peace Corps Community for Refugees. Many of them are Rotarians, and we have lots of opportunities for synergy between Rotary. There's a Rotary Action Fellowship group called the Rotary, the Rotary Action Group for Forced Displacement and Migration. It's a mouthful. And so it's really about having webinars and helping people understand the issues and, getting the word out. And this was especially true as our country welcomed and resettled the Afghan refugees, starting in August of 2021. So one of the things that, we'll hopefully, again, have a chance to get into when we have our little chat is how your Rotary E-Club can get involved. This picture right here is the Seeds of Service. So I was on point for our district 7610 back in 2021 and 22 for coordinating all 55 clubs in our district to respond to the Afghan refugees. And clubs did a lot of different things. Some collected coats, some collected underwear. We did all kinds of things. We had this amazing interview thing where we did a bunch of mock interviews at one of the Rotarians' houses, and we had it focused on women, Afghan women, who really were facing the job search for the first time. So there are lots of different creative ideas out there to support migrants, refugees, and internally displaced people. Return Peace Corps volunteers that you may or may not know that might be in your community are really good people to reach out to, because they've sort of lived, and most of them have been in countries where there are issues with forced migration and displacement, and they would be good references to you, or even a resource possibly, based on, many of them working in the social sector and international development. And finally, the club can get involved with just simply raising awareness and serving as advocates. It sounds like y'all have spent the month of February, I'm already in March, talking about peace building and talking about ways to reach out to others in your club and perhaps other clubs as well, to raise the awareness of what Rotary is doing with peace building. And so this is an opportunity to think about, who's in your community. Do you have pockets of Afghan refugees, for example? Are there other types of refugees being resettled? Maybe refugees from the Congo, refugees from Haiti, and there are just lots of different ways to be thinking about this. But the bottom line is that Rotary International Partnering for Peace is an excellent resource. Their website, we can send around in a follow-up message. It's got a lot of really good resources for you. So we're just going to move right into our Q&A right now. So I'm going to go and stop the screen share. Apologies for this not having that full screen there, but hopefully you guys were able to get at least an overview of what it is that we're talking about. And I'm happy to open it up for questions, because I'm not sure what part of that resonated with the club or what you might want to learn more about. So I'll just turn it over to anybody to ask the first question.
Well, Sonia, first of all, thank you so much. And I'm going to just open up the floor. I do have a question, but my question is a little bit more specific. I have a feeling there may be some broader questions first. And I was particularly interested in the slide about, how we as a club can get involved. And while you're formulating your questions, I do have one broad question. I think I either missed something or misunderstood. So the Partnering for Peace, is that a Rotary organization, or is it a Rotary organization because folks in it are Rotarians who were Peace Corps volunteers? I don't know if that makes
Right. No, that's a great question. So it is a Rotary organization.
Okay.
It is, and it is made up of people who are Rotarians first, and who are returned Peace Corps volunteers second.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
So all the people in it are both.
Yes.
The people that are running it are both, but then the people that support it could be either Peace Corps volunteers or Rotarians that are supporting the program.
Exactly. Yep. The people who are in it are both. And the key thing, it does get very confusing, I will say, because when people think of Peace Corps, they think of, okay, these are projects overseas, right? Well, we have a lot of issues of, immigrants and refugees and what have you in the United States. Partnering for Peace does not work domestically. They work internationally. So what they do is they support the Peace Corps volunteers in other countries. A lot of those Peace Corps volunteers are working on peace building projects in their little villages or what have you. The question of sort of advocacy in the US, that's the Peace Corps Community for Refugees, which is anybody. So all of you would be welcome if you're interested in this, to join us, who's interested in this. Primarily it is return Peace Corps volunteers, but we do have a lot of Peace Corps staff. And we have people in there from other countries as well.
I think that list of resources later on would be very helpful for us. We do a monthly newsletter, and a lot of us kind of use it as a, just a way to kind of put our thoughts together. So Candace, I'm sorry, I started talking, time your hand went up.
No, that's fine. And I think that's an excellent idea. And Sonia, I may follow up with an email to ask you if you would be willing to send us that, as for our benefit and also for those who couldn't make the meeting today. Lene does an extraordinary job of our bulletin monthly, and we'd love to see more of your information in there. The question I had was for Peace Corps volunteers who are overseas, do many of them actually reach out to local Rotary clubs for support or resources to help them, or what's the awareness of a lot of the overseas volunteers about Rotary?
Right. It's a great question, because for example, it depends on the kind of Peace Corps volunteer they are. So for example, I was a health volunteer way out in the jungle in Central America. There were no Rotary clubs in my village. None. We had dogs, chickens, tarantulas, and snakes and all that stuff, but no Rotarians. And that is also true for agriculture volunteers. So we're going to be out in fields and very rural communities and what have you. So you're thinking of the sector of volunteer that would be in a place where there would be a Rotary club. For example, small business volunteers, they are typically assigned to medium-sized cities where there is electricity, running water, and transportation. These are luxuries that most of us don't get in the Peace Corps. But if you're a small business volunteer, you're living the high life, and you've got electricity, water, and transportation. So in many Rotary clubs as well, the same is true. So if you think about, I'll just give you an example of the Dominican Republic, where I've worked extensively with Rotary clubs there. Many of them are in the small villages or towns within the country, made up of business owners in those countries. And so it's not, it might not represent fully, the sort of the stakeholders, if you will, where we're trying to reach out and really build those bridges of peace. In the Dominican, a good example is their relationship with Haitian immigrants. So the Rotary Club doesn't have any Haitians in it, right? So these are some of the dynamics that we really need to think about when we're talking about context. We're talking about depth and breadth and experience. And again, I would say that it depends on the country, because, not every country is dealing with peace building. I mean, that might be something they care about, but they care about running water more, and you can't, live without running water. So, so you really have to think priority wise around what partners are out there, what relationships you have. Peace Corps volunteers are informed of this opportunity, and mostly through their training. I went through 3 months of training, and that's just a requirement. Once you get into the country, you have training in that country. And so, yes, this kind of partnership thing is definitely talked about. It's just perhaps not available to every Peace Corps volunteer. And the other thing is, Peace Corps volunteers have what they call a primary project, which is, let's say, health or what have you. And then they have a secondary project. And sometimes a secondary project is where their heart is, their passion. And so they end up putting more effort into the secondary project compared to the primary, even though they've been assigned in a primary sector. So that's another dynamic as well to think about is, what kind of relation, where's the Peace Corps volunteer? What kind of volunteer are they? Are they in their first year? Are they in their second year? These are questions that you really need to unpack when you think about partnering, with a Peace Corps volunteer.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. Sonia, thank you for all you've been doing for peace building. This is one of my favorite subjects, actually, and one of the reasons that I originally joined Rotary. In addition to being an architect, I'm a professional facilitator. And one of the things that I have been working on is creating a vision for 200 years to have people get a sense of the future and what you want. So I tried an experiment with a group of professional coaches, and I had them create a vision for 200 years for the world. And wouldn't you know that the consensus vision was simply peace and freedom for everyone. Mm-hmm. So I've been, I guess, intrigued of how Rotary has been making a difference in peace building, and all of the master's degree scholarships that they've funded. It's a massive commitment, and yet the thing that I don't see is what measurable difference is all of the work that so many people are doing for peace building. How much progress have we made over the last 20 years in the world, with all the conflicts that we see? I mean, the people in the trenches, I don't think get enough credit for the difference that they make. And so I've been looking for someone who's actually creating some measurable goals so we can see what difference we're making.
Yeah. Well, those two things, first of all, thank you for that, because I mean, where your heart is I think where all of us would want to be, in a world where there's peace and freedom for all, regardless. There are two answers that I have to that comment. One is, if you think about measuring how far we've come, it assumes that you've actually you've done a baseline analysis of where we are. I don't think Rotary has done that, right? They've probably started a bunch of peace building activities, but they probably never did a baseline study of where they started from, which means that they can't measure their development because they never had a baseline to start. Okay, so there's that. But that doesn't mean that the work that they're doing isn't valuable and isn't having a difference. The only challenge we're left with is how we measure it. So one of the challenges that I've found, and this is true for anything in relief and development work, is that you really have two groups. We talked about the plumbers and the electricians for hearts. In international development, you have the practitioners and the theoreticians, if that's the word, people who are doing theory.
Academics,
there you go, another word for that. And I think peace building falls into a very academic category for a lot of people. I think they study peace building. There's certain things you do, in facilitation and understanding about how to get groups to talk together. So it's a very academic thing, but how many people are actually doing it in real life, and that is a challenge I think Rotary has. Rotary is is known for, if you think about the big context in international development, a lot of our health work, our polio work, our partnership and our ability, our network, our global network is super important. But, I couldn't say that Rotary is famous for, peace building. That doesn't mean that our leaders at Rotary haven't said, well, this is important to us nonetheless, and we want to be a player, and we are a player, and they are. They're at the United Nations, their global network enables them to be in the places where these conflicts are happening. And because of the way that we're structured, we're able to give grants and support to clubs that are doing this kind of work. But I think it needs more awareness. I think it needs more, people on the ground. And frankly, I think even if we start today and do a baseline analysis, at least in 5 or 10 years, we will be able to say, okay, this is how far we've come. So it's never too late to start measuring our outcomes and our successes, but at the same time, also getting the word out. This is an awesome opportunity for me to talk with all of you. And so, it is about that day to day, those tasks that we do, that we share information with one another, and that ripple effect, I think, is what ultimately makes a difference.
Great, thank you. Sounds like a great grant idea.
Sonia, I would add to that something either you or Ken said. My first thought was, some of the hesitancy about, volunteers getting into Pakistan and Afghanistan for vaccines. The progress they have made there had to do with the trust in an organization. And I think, sometimes that trust really is kind of a peacekeeping type of function. Because, for people who would not normally allow somebody with vaccines to come in, there was an element of peace in that trust that was built that eventually allowed, for some of those areas to be accessed. And even though it's problematic, I guess what I'm trying to say is I think sometimes we look at peace with a big P, and sometimes peace can have a little p that, we just don't maybe identify as peace.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a concept of confianza, and a Spanish word that maybe if you tried to directly translate it, you would say confidence or you would say trust, but it's actually so much more than that. It's all of those things wrapped into one. And so I think even in our own English language, we don't have words that deeply describe what a community relationship and trust and confidence really needs to look like in order to have an impact, an effective impact. You can have an impact. Whether or not it's effective is a completely different question.
Something I read not long ago, I guess, well, maybe a year or so, is that in some parts of the world, because of the work that had been done with polio, that it made it actually much easier to facilitate COVID vaccinations because those relationships were in place. And so that kind of thing actually is somewhat measurable, I think.
Yeah, you're right. It is. It is. And, the unfortunately, the adverse is also true. So where Rotarians were out and through Rotary networks, we were vaccinating people against polio. Well, now that wasn't happening, which means they weren't getting measles shots, or they weren't getting mumps and rubella and any of those other shots. And unfortunately, childhood diseases is just up through the roof now in many of these countries. So, and I think Rotary has a long way to go to explain to Rotarians the complexity of what it means to eradicate polio. We think, oh, it's just a question of time and manpower. No, it's not. It's so much more than that, and now we're dealing with it in many, many countries, including some cases in the US. So yeah, it's a complicated topic, but all of these things are interwoven. Health is a part of education, is a part of peace building, is a part of that. They're all related. And that's why I love our Rotary wheel, because our wheel connects us to all of the different things that are happening. It's not just one thing, it's all of us together working in partnership.
Sonia, the one specific question I had is, if somebody knows somebody who was a Peace Corps volunteer, they've been invited to Rotary meetings, they haven't come, that's another topic. But if somebody was a Peace Corps volunteer, through those resources, we'd be able to find a place for them to connect to, maybe? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. If they were interested in doing a peace building project in their village, yes, there are resources for the Peace Corps volunteers.
Okay, great. Great. Okay. What other comments or questions or speculations about how our club can continue our efforts for peace building? Certainly, as Candace pointed out at the beginning, we've had a fabulous month that allows us great reflection and great thoughts, to be provoked from all this. But what can we do next? How can we continue this rather than it just being a one-time, shot in the dark in February, so to speak. So, I mean, a couple of my thoughts, have to do with, an awareness. I think the work with the Mary and Martha House certainly, helps us as Rotarians to be aware as well as provide opportunity. But what are some other thoughts that you may have as a result of what Sonia has presented to us today?
I guess I would say that, with this connection, Sonia, that maybe putting us in touch with another Rotarian or Peace Corps volunteer to talk more specifically about the in the States project with the refugees, to maybe give a little program more specific to that in some ways that we could be helping through that process. I think it's easy for people that aren't in an area where refugees are coming into to not understand, or to just not be aware, to allow yourself to not be aware of the huge impact it's having in very local areas. And to kind of forget that it's happening every day, which is where, with Frank and Alberto, keeping us in the loop that, there's constantly people coming in that are in need of services, not just for their personal daily, but like you said, with the helping the Afghan women with getting ready for job interviews, some of that stuff is just, how can we just be supportive when it's not necessarily money or items they need, but things like that even just providing a supportive role while people try to assimilate would be an interesting program.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm not sure, because it's an e-club, what sort of geography y'all would, but you can email me afterwards and I can look at our network and see if we have some contacts. I guess you said Greenville, and a couple other places in North Carolina and South Carolina. So we can look at that. Your district is a good resource as well, maybe somewhere in your district, they're helping refugees. But yeah, I mean, and then I also have a spreadsheet where I've broken it down by state, and I know which agencies are working in which state, and I can send that to you as well, because you might be able to just reach out to that agency and say, hey, we're in the state and we'd like to know what you're doing in our state. That would be interesting.
It would be. Sonia, you have opened the door for many avenues of thought for us on this, and we greatly appreciate that. Some of this can seem kind of nebulous, but when heads get together like what we're doing now, you can begin putting feet to plans and making things happen. So I appreciate that. And I don't think this conversation is going to end. Our club is really good about grabbing hold of something and working through it and figuring out how we can do something. And one of our tagline is, how can we be the virtual club for Rotary to set the example that a virtual community can make a difference. And so we certainly appreciate everything that you have inspired us today. And we are certainly very in awe of what you have done as a returning Peace Corps volunteer, and certainly as a Rotarian. One of the things that we like to do in our club is to offer everybody who has offer our speakers, rather than a gift, like maybe in a face-to-face club, we like to put a book in a little free library. And so this will go in the library in recognition of you and Don. and it will certainly talk about, it will have a placard in it that we're recognizing your Rotary and your Peace Corps service, as well as your work to promote partnering in peace. So thank you so very much for being with us today. Taking time out to put together the slide presentation and sharing that to us. It's just very meaningful to us, and we very much appreciate that.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for this lovely acknowledgement. I love it. It's a great way to pay it forward. So
Well,
thank you. Yeah.
You're very welcome. And I thought to myself, it is all about community. And we talked a little bit about that at the end. And so we are all better together. And thank you for helping us see that.